Hello everyone. The course that I've completed is called Historical Modern Cities, and it makes sense that I would choose to take a class about cities when not only do I enjoy learning what countries they are capital of as a geography major, but I also have my whole life lived in cities. Perhaps two of the most interesting, I might say. My hometowns are London and Las Vegas, and I also consider the Bay Area, like San Francisco and Oakland, my hometown as well. I put some nice pictures. There's London. Okay, and my whole life, what I have known about the world around me has been from the viewpoint of an urbanite. Life for me takes place in the big bustling city. Studying the city is very different from living in it, however. One of the most important takeaways I got from my course then was that everything can have significance when it comes to the built environment. The buildings I live in are fascinating. I just didn't know how to look at them before my classes at UC Berkeley. Someone planted the trees in the pavement. Each neighbourhood was shaped by the lines of transport that run through it. I'll put Las Vegas for you. That's what it looks like in the suburbs, looking at the strip. And the way we experience and study the city changes from modern to historical. Not that all cities aren't historical, because everything has a past and a reason, and this past second is now history. But to understand a city in the context of a time that is centuries in the past creates challenges. But I would say that studying a city of the past may, on the surface, be even easier in a strange way, because for significant enough locations, you have the facts lined up for you in chronological order. So this hinders us from understanding it in more depth. So the key is to discover how it was to spend the everyday in the cities of old, the historical cities, and then how the everydayness of the cities of the present only hide all the connections they hold and the stories they have to tell, the sensory overload of living in the modern city. My course thread taught me how to uncover cities from whatever is clouding our view of them, and to discover as much as we can about the ways they bring people together to impact the course of human history. So I'm especially glad I took the classes for this course in the order I did. The first class I took was my first year at Berkeley. It was in the history department, History 2. And I even considered being a history major for a short while, but then there was lots of reading. And I love geography anyway, so it all worked out. So this course, History 2, was titled Comparative World History, World Cities. It started far in the past and went up through the 20th century, so all the way from ancient Rome to imperial Edo or Tokyo, Haussmann's Paris, and pre-colonial through present Delhi. It was quite a fantastic setup because each quarter the class was taught by a different professor who specialised in the area being lectured on. This allowed for incredible depth in each section and the feeling of having 4 classes in one semester. It was a challenging course for sure, because keeping up with all the reading and jumping from topics and styles of teaching took a lot of energy, but it expanded my knowledge of cities fourfold, I would say. So Professor Metcalf was the expert on ancient Rome, and his lectures were vivid, and he really understood the concept of bringing the scholar into the everydayness of life on the ancient ground. We still had to learn milestones in history, such as when Emperor Constantine converted to Christianity and the year big battles were fought, but that's not what I remember now. I do remember his descriptions of the sewer-filled stone streets and the recreated diagrams of the magnificent mosaic villas that house the city's elites. I also recall how we were invited to look at the big picture of this ancient city and its connections to the world around it. I'm very big on connections, with the influx of migrants coming in and the grain exports and how they allowed one town in Italy to become one of the world's greatest empires. Then Edo was the topic for Professor Berry. This section was really fun because for the first class, she gave the room, it's a really big lecture hall, she gave us a speedy course on how to pronounce Japanese words. So I thought that was one of the most immediately useful lessons from any history class I've taken. I still remember parts of it, pronounce the vowels. Okay, so the other lectures were also great, and we looked at a very specific period of history when Edo was ruled by the powerful Tokugawa shogunate. And again, what stuck out was the living quarters of the people, how the town squares that had their storefronts facing out, and then even the scenes from the Yoshiwara red light district. Then the talks on Haussmann's Paris under Napoleon III from another professor, Barrows. I remember learning how tearing down the streets in the 19th century reorganised the whole culture of the city, and reading vivid accounts of how the flaneurs and dandies strolled through the arcades of the French capital, rapidly modernising. But then I have to admit, with Delhi, what I remember is not quite so clear. I mostly recall that we looked at the city over hundreds of years and through huge transitions, from the Mughal Empire to the British colony and then the modern-day capital of India. But it didn't quite stick in the same way. This information was interesting, but it wasn't focused on the experience of people who lived there during a certain period of time. I couldn't imagine myself in the everydayness of it through their eyes, because once we got settled in an era, we would zoom forward a dozen decades or so it didn't quite feel as real. It was the facts lined up in chronological order experience. It was easy to grasp, it was full of important knowledge, but it lacked an appeal to the emotions for me. The professor who taught the next two classes in my course thread absolutely understood bringing emotions into history. It was Professor Groth. He's in the geography department, and he's passionate about helping his students look at history in a different, more invested way. And I didn't just gather this from how he taught. He gave speeches to the class on how every part of the environment has history embedded within it, and how really discovering the cultural landscape can be a beautiful thing. He didn't use the word beautiful, but that's what I gathered from the class. So the two classes were set. There was Geography C160A and then B, and both were cross-listed with American Studies and Environmental Design. I think someone else, you took one as well, yeah. And together they covered American cultural landscape 1600 to present. I thought this class was really fascinating. Each lecture would focus on one aspect of the American landscape and put it in a historical context, and then be accompanied with visual slides to help us find clues in them to what we see in built structures and to help us determine who, how, why, when they were made just by the visual information and the clues we saw. And how their existence shaped the people around them and within them as much as they were shaped by their physical builders as well. Just a colonial town, I might have looked at Boston, okay. So, although we looked at rural farmsteads and railroads in the Midwest and national parks in this class, how cities played a key role in shaping America was what stood out to me. We examined how the layouts of colonial New England townships reflected the social standards of those who lived there by housing the most prominent members in the middle by the churches. We learned how the towns plotted by homesteaders seemed to promise social equality through their square grids and equidistant blocks. We also never looked at cities without examining their connections. The hinterlands and resources of urban communities pushed some into becoming industrial metropolises in the 1800s, but not others. The anti-city mentality of the baby boomers sent them to the suburbs and also kept investment out of America's inner cities. It was a class that looked for patterns across urban communities. So rather than the history class, that one delved deep into important ones in particular. And through taking both sets of classes, I acquired the know-how to do both, to see the significance in specifics and draw generalizations from overarching clues. And this perfectly prepared me for what is perhaps my favourite class of all of them. This is the last one. I really get to apply my knowledge in the class I'm taking this semester. I was able to do research papers in the other classes, such as gender dynamics in Edo, and then on Berkeley, Iceland, that closed down ice skating rink in South Berkeley, I think is fascinating. But nothing beats the learning experience of spending hours and hours physically exploring the city and applying all the knowledge I learned into critically examining the very places I used to bike carelessly around every day. So this coming Friday is the last meeting of my geography class, Urban Field Geography, taught by Professor Richard Walker. And when describing it to my friends, describing what my class is, I say, I get to walk around the neighbours of the Bay Area all day and have an expert scholar be my tour guide. And it's a really priceless experience. It concentrates on the urban, and I have learned more about San Francisco, Berkeley, Oakland, Emeryville than I probably would have just by living here for another 10 years and not really paying attention. I would guess that I have never done so much walking for extended periods before, because it's 9 to 5 every Friday, up and down the hills of San Francisco, up to Coit Tower, to the Berkeley Hills, walking all the way down to 4th Street. And with this class, we saw the important monuments. We saw the Trans-American period, West Oakland shipping yards, the Yerba Buena Arts Complex, to why they're important. But what really stood out was what wouldn't have stood out unless the professor made a point for us to look at it. The details in house exteriors that showed they were pre-earthquake, or why a certain condominium community in Emeryville has a looped road around it. turns out it was built over a horse race track from when the city was a gambling centre. And by writing about the places we visited every week, along with 2 extensive research projects in the semester, so I did one on the Excelsior district of in southern San Francisco, and I'm finishing one up on Pleasanton in the East Bay, I have to really listen to what I'm learning, rather than taking the facts that are presented to me at face value. I have to connect everything I am seeing and experiencing to piece together a story about the built environment, about these urban landscapes. So you may have noticed that in my talk, I haven't mentioned too much about what sections were on the syllabuses or syllabi or the architectural vocabulary we were expected to memorize, the differences between Beaux Arts and Art Deco. I didn't even mention how a city is defined, though I did learn there's a disagreement on that anyhow. So I learned these things, but they didn't change the way I viewed the world. And the city is a very big part of my personal world. My outlook has been changed by this course thread in other, bigger ways. I pay attention to what is around me. I enjoy the clinker bricks and the historical Berkeley landmark status of the apartment building I live in. I actually feel joy when I come across roads that I can identify just by looking at clues as former streetcar intersections like Ian was talking about. I really like looking at that. And for me, these classes are about taking all kinds of cities, the ancient, the industrial, the high-tech, the distant, the one I'm living in, and actively seeking to uncover their stories and the stories of who built them, along with the people who still call them home. Every city has thousands of fascinating details and connections to discover, and I'm confident I'll continue looking out for them well after my days as a human geography undergraduate have passed. Thank you.